Welcome back to English Vocabulary Podcast, where we explore the fascinating world of English vocabulary and its impact on our daily lives. I'm Laura.
And I'm Callum. Today we're diving into something really exciting, how incorporating new words into our everyday conversations can serve as powerful mental exercise, essentially turning our daily interactions into brain workouts.
That's right, Callum. We're not just talking about learning new words and filing them away in our mental dictionaries. We're talking about actively using them, making them part of our conversational toolkit, and treating this practice as a form of cognitive fitness.
And our featured word today perfectly embodies this concept, ubiquitous. It's a word that's everywhere once you start noticing it, yet many people shy away from using it in conversation. We're going to change that.
Before we explore ubiquitous, let's talk about why treating vocabulary expansion as mental exercise is so crucial. Callum, you've done research on cognitive health. What happens in our brains when we actively incorporate new words into our speech patterns?
It's fascinating, Laura. When we consciously use new vocabulary in conversation, we're essentially forcing our brains to create new neural pathways. It's like the difference between walking the same route to work every day versus deliberately taking different streets. The brain has to work harder, make new connections, and strengthen existing ones.
I love that analogy. And there's something particularly powerful about doing this through conversation rather than just reading or writing. When we speak new words, we're engaging multiple cognitive processes simultaneously: recall, pronunciation, contextual application, and real-time communication.
Exactly. Studies from Johns Hopkins have shown that people who regularly challenge themselves with new vocabulary in spoken conversation maintain better cognitive flexibility as they age. It's like CrossFit for your brain.
And here's what I find most exciting about this approach. It makes vocabulary building social and interactive rather than solitary and academic. You're not just studying words, you're living with them, playing with them, making them part of your personality.
Which brings us beautifully to our word of the day, ubiquitous. Now, this is a perfect example of a word that people often recognize when they read it, but hesitate to use in conversation. Let's break that barrier down.
Let's start with the basics. Ubiquitous is an adjective meaning present, appearing, or found everywhere. But there's more nuance to it than just everywhere. It suggests a kind of pervasive presence that's so complete it becomes almost unnoticeable.
The etymology is really compelling. Ubiquitous comes from the Latin ubique, meaning everywhere, which itself derives from ubi, meaning where. The word entered English in the 1830s, initially used in religious contexts to describe the omnipresence of the divine.
That religious origin is important because it explains why ubiquitous carries a sense of something that's not just physically present everywhere, but pervades every aspect of a situation or environment. It's more profound than simply saying common or widespread.
Now here's where the mental exercise aspect becomes really interesting. Ubiquitous is what I call a recognition to usage word. Most educated adults recognize it when they encounter it, but very few incorporate it into their active vocabulary.
And that's such a missed opportunity because once you start using ubiquitous in conversation, you realize how often you need exactly this concept. Let me give you some examples where ubiquitous is not just appropriate, but actually the most precise word choice.
Please do. I think our listeners will be surprised at how versatile this word is.
Okay, first example. Smartphones have become ubiquitous in modern society. Now, you could say common or everywhere, but ubiquitous captures something more. The idea that smartphones aren't just widespread, they've become so integral to daily life that their presence is assumed.
That's perfect. Here's another. The smell of coffee was ubiquitous throughout the office building. Again, you could say everywhere, but ubiquitous suggests that the coffee aroma had permeated every space, becoming part of the environment itself.
And here's one from technology. Data collection has become ubiquitous in digital platforms. This usage emphasizes how data gathering isn't just common, it's so thoroughly integrated into every aspect of our online experience that we barely notice it anymore.
I love how these examples show that ubiquitous often describes things that are so omnipresent they become invisible or taken for granted. It's not just about quantity, it's about integration into the fabric of experience.
Exactly. And this is where the mental exercise aspect becomes so valuable. When you start actively looking for opportunities to use ubiquitous, you begin to notice patterns of pervasiveness in your environment that you might have overlooked before.
That's such an important point, Laura. Incorporating new words into our speech doesn't just change how we communicate, it actually changes how we perceive and categorize our experiences. It's like adding new colors to your palette.
Now, let's talk about the practical aspects of making this mental exercise work. It's not enough to just learn the definition of ubiquitous and hope it naturally appears in your conversations. You need a strategy.
Absolutely. I recommend what I call the conscious insertion method. For 1 week, challenge yourself to use ubiquitous at least once per day in natural conversation. This forces you to actively scan your daily experiences, looking for appropriate contexts.
That's brilliant. And what's interesting is that this practice doesn't just help you master one word, it trains your brain to be more receptive to incorporating other new vocabulary. You're building a habit of linguistic adventurousness.
Right, and here's another strategy. Practice what I call synonym swapping. When you catch yourself saying everywhere or common, pause and ask yourself, would ubiquitous be more precise here? This trains you to think more critically about word choice.
I want to emphasize something important here. This isn't about showing off or sounding pretentious, it's about precision and mental agility. When you use ubiquitous appropriately, you're actually communicating more effectively, not less.
Exactly, and there's a confidence that comes from knowing you have the right word for a specific concept. Instead of fumbling with phrases like, it's everywhere and sort of built into everything, you can simply say, it's ubiquitous.
Let's explore some more contexts where ubiquitous really shines. In business, remote work has made video conferencing ubiquitous in corporate culture. This captures how video calls aren't just frequent, they've become the default assumption for meetings.
In social commentary, social media's influence has become ubiquitous in political discourse. Again, we're not just saying it's influential, we're suggesting it's so woven into political conversation that it's impossible to separate them.
And in everyday observation, the sound of construction seems ubiquitous in this neighborhood. This suggests the sounds don't just occur frequently, they've become part of the ambient environment.
What I find fascinating is how using ubiquitous in these contexts actually makes you more aware of patterns of pervasiveness in your daily life. You start noticing things that are so integrated into your environment that you'd previously taken them for granted.
That's the cognitive benefit we're talking about. This mental exercise isn't just about vocabulary. It's about developing sharper observational skills and more nuanced thinking patterns.
Now let's address a common concern people have about incorporating words like ubiquitous into their daily speech. They worry about sounding artificial or academic in casual conversation.
I'm so glad you brought that up, Calum. The key is authentic integration, not forced insertion. Ubiquitous shouldn't feel like you're putting on fancy clothes. It should feel like you're using the most accurate tool for the job.
Exactly. And here's a practical tip. Start using new words in low-stakes situations first. Practice with ubiquitous when describing your observations to family members or close friends before introducing it in professional settings.
Another great approach is to use it in written communication first. Emails, texts, social media posts. This gives you a chance to get comfortable with the word's rhythm and feel before speaking it aloud.
And don't be afraid to acknowledge your vocabulary choices. You can say something like, I've been trying to use more precise words lately, and I think ubiquitous really captures what I mean here. People appreciate honesty about language learning.
That's such good advice. Now, let's talk about why this practice is particularly important in our current information age. We're constantly exposed to new concepts and technologies that require precise vocabulary to discuss effectively.
Absolutely. Think about how many phenomena in modern life are truly ubiquitous but lack precise common language to describe them. When you develop comfort with words like ubiquitous, you're better equipped to articulate observations about contemporary life.
For instance, you might notice that anxiety about climate change has become ubiquitous among young professionals, or that the assumption of constant connectivity has become ubiquitous in work culture. These are complex social observations that require sophisticated vocabulary.
And here's something really interesting. When you start using words like ubiquitous regularly, you often inspire others to elevate their own vocabulary choices. It becomes contagious in the best possible way.
I've definitely experienced that. When you model thoughtful word choice, people around you often start paying more attention to their own language precision. You're essentially leading a micro movement toward better communication.
Now let's get practical about building this mental exercise habit. I recommend keeping what I call a target word journal. Each week choose one new word, like ubiquitous, and commit to using it authentically at least 5 times in conversation.
That's a great system, and I'd add this. Pay attention to the context where your chosen word appears naturally. With ubiquitous, you'll start noticing it in articles about technology, discussions of cultural trends, and observations about modern life.
Here's another exercise. Try explaining familiar concepts using your new vocabulary. Instead of saying social media is everywhere, challenge yourself to articulate why it's specifically ubiquitous and what that ubiquity means for society.
I love that because it forces you to think more deeply about the concepts you're describing. You're not just using a fancier word, you're developing more sophisticated understanding of the phenomena around you.
And this brings us to a crucial point. This mental exercise isn't just about individual benefit. When we collectively elevate our vocabulary use, we improve the quality of public discourse and social understanding.
Exactly. When more people are comfortable using precise words like ubiquitous, we can have more nuanced conversations about complex topics. Instead of vague generalizations, we get specific, thoughtful analysis.
Let's talk about some advanced applications of ubiquitous. In academic or professional contexts, you might discuss how certain assumptions have become ubiquitous in a field or how particular technologies have achieved ubiquitous adoption.
And in creative contexts, the melancholy of autumn seemed ubiquitous in her poetry. Or references to classical mythology were ubiquitous throughout the exhibition. The word works beautifully for describing pervasive themes or elements.
What's particularly powerful about ubiquitous is that it often signals a critical observation. When you describe something as ubiquitous, you're usually pointing out a phenomenon that deserves attention precisely because it's become so pervasive.
That's such an insightful point. Ubiquitous often carries an analytical edge. It suggests you've noticed something that others might take for granted because of its very omnipresence.
Now, before we wrap up, let's address the broader implications of this mental exercise approach to vocabulary building. When you commit to actively incorporating new words like ubiquitous into your daily speech, you're essentially training yourself to be a more conscious communicator.
Right. You become someone who chooses words deliberately rather than defaulting to the first adequate option. This precision of thought often transfers to other areas of decision-making and problem-solving.
And there's a confidence that comes from knowing you can articulate your observations precisely. Whether you're in a job interview, a social gathering, or an academic discussion, having access to precise vocabulary makes you a more effective communicator.
Plus, there's genuine joy in discovering that you have the perfect word for a specific concept. When you realize that ubiquitous captures exactly what you want to say about smartphone culture or social media influence, it's deeply satisfying.
I want our listeners to understand that this isn't about intellectual showing off, it's about intellectual empowerment. When you expand your active vocabulary through daily practice, you're literally expanding your capacity for thought and expression.
And the beautiful thing about starting with a word like ubiquitous is that once you master it, you'll naturally gravitate toward other sophisticated vocabulary. It's like strength training. Each new word makes the next one easier to incorporate.
So here's our challenge to listeners. For the next week, make ubiquitous your target word. Look for opportunities to use it authentically in conversation. Notice how it changes your awareness of pervasive patterns in your environment.
And pay attention to how it feels to use more precise vocabulary.
Notice the reactions you get, the confidence you develop, and the observations you're able to articulate more clearly.
Remember, the goal isn't to use ubiquitous as often as possible, it's to use it when it's the most accurate word choice. Quality over quantity, precision over frequency.
And don't be discouraged if it feels awkward at first. Like any form of exercise, building vocabulary strength takes practice. The more you do it, the more natural it becomes.
As we've discovered today, words like ubiquitous aren't just vocabulary items, they're tools for more sophisticated thinking and more effective communication. They help us notice and articulate aspects of our world that less precise language might miss.
Whether you're describing the ubiquitous nature of digital technology, the ubiquitous presence of anxiety in modern life, or the ubiquitous influence of social media on contemporary culture, having this word in your active vocabulary makes you a more precise observer and communicator.
So embrace the mental exercise of vocabulary expansion. Challenge yourself to incorporate new words into your daily conversations. Treat your vocabulary like a muscle that needs regular intentional strengthening.
And remember, every word you master doesn't just change how you speak. It changes how you think, how you observe, and how you understand the world around you.
That's the real power of vocabulary as mental exercise. It's not just about communication, it's about cognition itself.
That's all for today's episode of Word Power. Thank you for joining us on this exploration of vocabulary as mental fitness and our deep dive into Ubiquitous.
Keep practicing, keep observing, and keep building that word power. Until next time, make your vocabulary work for you.
And remember, great communication starts with great word choices. Make them count.